A lot of matches on the Backlash card for France coming up this weekend, but there are some important ones, including two big world title matches, several title matches actually, as we know. Tag team titles, women's titles are on the line. We know Bayley has to defend her championship in a triple threat, and like I mentioned, the two world title matches. But then you've got this match, which is the one that I think could get very interesting, depending on how WWE decides to go about this match and how they book it. And that is, of course, the tag team showdown grudge match between the Bloodline and Kevin Owens and Randy Orton. And this, of course, has been set up over the past couple weeks. The Bloodline got their attack on Kevin Owens. We saw Tama Tonga go after him, kind of had the numbers advantage there, the 2-on-1 where Solo and, Tama Tonga really got after Kevin Owens. He's busted up, all that stuff. Then, more recently, you had Randy Orton be the one to sort of make the save. And now you have these two teaming up to take on this new version of the Bloodline here as we go into Backlash in France. And look, I mean, we all know what's out there, right? We know that there is a debut that is on the way in WWE, and more specifically, a debut that is on the way with the Bloodline. We know Jacob Fatu has been signed at this point. There were some reports, as we mentioned in previous videos, that he was going to make his debut as soon as last Friday on the start of the WWE draft on SmackDown. He did not, and there was a report that came out before that saying that the debut had been delayed a little bit. They had a plan, and they weren't exactly there were no specifics on when he was actually going to debut. But the speculation has continued. Will he be debuting this weekend in France in this match? You guys know I've talked about it before. The numbers advantage, right? This is a situation now where it's 2-on-2. You've got Orton coming to Owens' aid, and you've got it even now with Solo and Tama Tonga going up against these two guys. But it's the Bloodline, and to be able to give them that numbers advantage, it would be pretty simple, right? You bring in Jacob Fatu, he makes this a 3-on-2, and then we see how things progress from there. And yes, I think that's still a very likely, maybe possibility that happens. I don't know if that happens at Backlash because, as some people brought up, I know it was mentioned recently, people have speculated online, yes, Jacob Fatu has a record, and so some people pondered, well, does that mean there are travel limitations in place and all of this other stuff? Does that still apply here? No clue. But I know people have debated that and wondered, will that be maybe what keeps him from debuting maybe in this setting or some of the other settings coming up? I don't know. I mean, that's just, again, that's all speculation. I don't think no specifics on that right now. At least I don't. But I think it's interesting to think about how they are going to go about introducing him because, like we said, they've really established the whole savage nature of this Bloodline now, right? It's all about the ruthless streak of Solo Sikoa and Tama Tonga. Not even Paul Heyman can stop him. Nick Aldis is doing what he can to kind of put the pressure on Heyman, but Heyman knows he has no control over these guys. And, they've kind of pushed that too in the official WWE.com preview for whatever that's worth, really pushing the fact that Aldis has made it clear that Heyman needs to get control of these guys. And I think what you do here, if you bring Jacob Fatu in this particular match, well, what could you do, right? You completely add more chaos to the mix by bringing him in, and that only furthers kind of that tension with Nick Aldis and the Bloodline. And then maybe, I've said, maybe eventually that leads to the Bloodline taking out Nick Aldis. We don't know. That could be ways down the road, but I think you're starting to see them. I've mentioned the savage nature, right? They're really pushing that. And Jacob Fatu coming in is only going to add to it because you've got these three guys. If this is how they go about it, they pair these three guys together, which seems to be the most realistic possibility of Solo, Tama Tonga, and a savage, and Jacob Fatu, then you've got everything set up the way you want it. And the only questions then become, all right, how does everyone kind of counter this? How do all the baby faces, Randy Orton, Kevin Owens, whoever else is going to be there? We know Jimmy whenever he comes back, but he's out with an injury right now. We, of course, know Roman Reigns is going to come back eventually. Don't know what the time frame is on that. But you've really got this just formidable trio. I mean, it would be a trio at that point of what do you do? How do you stop these guys? And at least that gives you some intriguing storylines to work with on SmackDown moving forward without Roman Reigns, without The Rock for now. And I still think it's such a great idea that you always come back around at the end to where The Rock is the one who has pushed Solo, Tama Tonga, Jacob Fatu into, the don't give a damn group of the Bloodline, where they are just out for blood on everyone that has wronged them in the past and all of that. And so I think that's the way they ultimately set it up. But I think I'm curious, just do they pull this out in France where you have Jacob Fatu make his debut there, or do they wait? Because like we said, the report last week seemed to hint that the wait may be a little bit longer than this. And remember, too, we also mentioned, and I've seen a lot of people talk about, if he does debut here, maybe they do sort of the switcheroo. Maybe you think he's going to debut in this tag team match. This won't be the main event, but maybe you think he's going to debut here, but then somehow he gets involved in the Jey Uso, Damien Priest match. We know Jay's going for the world title, and my thinking in on that is, hey, you've got this brand split, but remember, it doesn't go in effect until after Backlash. So because this is like a dual-branded PLE, you can get away with having the different brands interact with each other, right? And so I think that's always an appealing element too here. If you're going to do a big debut like this, you don't have the roster limitations now that you've done this draft. And we know WrestleMania season, WrestleMania rules, anybody could go on any brand, and the draft didn't matter at that point. But now that they just did this is kind of your last free-for-all scenario where everybody, is kind of under the same building before you go off into this brand split. Of course, you're still going to have the PLEs with matches on both brands, but I think this is the opportunity that if you want to somehow tie Jey back into this thing, you have to keep him away after this just because of the way that, he got drafted to Raw, the Bloodline's still on SmackDown. But I think now is kind of the time, though, if you wanted to push that story forward a little bit without Jimmy in the picture, without Reigns in the picture, without The Rock there, this is kind of an opportunity for the Bloodline to somehow do something to Jey to ignite that feud. And look, trades are always possible too. You guys know I've talked about that. That is something where, look, eventually Jey could be forcing a trade to SmackDown. And how do we see that play out? There are lots of possibilities that you could have with this. But I think the biggest question still going into this match is, are we going to get Jacob Fatu? And if we do, this could be your typical, I don't know who wins the match, right? You would assume this is the one the Bloodline has to win because you want them to build that momentum. But do they win via Jacob Fatu? Do they win just because they just go all out and ruthless, just completely destroy Owens and Orton? I think those are fair questions here going into it. And I think we really see it. And look, even if he doesn't debut here, there's got to be something that probably furthers the idea that maybe he doesn't show up in France here, but maybe on the next SmackDown. That's when you get the debut. Or, like I mentioned earlier, maybe they really do have this meticulous plan where this thing's going to draw out, a little bit longer, which we know this storyline really has to carry itself until Roman Reigns comes back, until The Rock comes back, until Jimmy comes back. Like we said, you've still got to figure out the Jey part of this whole equation. So this thing's got a long way to go. So if Jacob Fatu does not show up at Backlash, I don't think people should be getting worried because I just think it tells you that they are definitely going with a much longer game here. And they kind of have to when you think about the availability or lack of their top stars, right? You're not going to have Reigns every week. You're not going to have Rock every week. But I think it's at least interesting to think about what's the percentage we put on Jacob Fatu showing up at Backlash. Oh, it's like this feels like one of those 50-50 things. I can see all the reasons why he would be there and why they would want to go ahead and really make this, a big deal. But, too, if you are appealing to kind of your crowd, you wonder, do you do this, on a PLE that, in the States is in the middle of the day and all these other, these are questions we've asked before with some of the, the whether it was Australia, whether it was some of the others. And so these are questions, too, you have to ask. But this Backlash card, I think, needs a little bit of something. It needs that because Cody's a huge favorite to retain the title. Damien Priest is a huge favorite to retain the title. The tag team championships, I think Bianca and Jade are going to win those, and I don't think there's much doubt about that. So there's not a lot of suspense on this card. But maybe something like this, bringing Jacob Fatu into the fold, maybe that's where this is kind of your big moment from Backlash that you get, knowing that some of the other matches just feel very predictable. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's always a challenge after WrestleMania when you get new champions. You just feel pretty confident they're not going to lose those belts right away. You do the best you can to build up challengers, but this is the match that has the most intrigue and the most suspense, at least for me, because there are a lot of unknown elements. Like I said, whether it's Jacob Fatu debuting, also how do these parties fit into the Jey thing? there are lots of ways you could go with this, and so we'll find out if we get that new Bloodline member debuting to officially get the Savage Bloodline in full effect here moving forward. But you guys let me know what you think. Give me your predictions for Backlash, and specifically your predictions for this match, the Bloodline versus Kevin Owens and Randy Orton. How do you think this thing unfolds? Do you think it's pretty clear that the Bloodline are going to get the win? What are your picks on how this thing is going to, pan out here at Backlash? And so, as always, appreciate you guys watching. Hit that subscribe button, hit the like button on your way out, and let me know your predictions again for this big tag team match, the Bloodline versus Kevin Owens and Randy Orton. And do we see Jacob Fatu?